I basically suffocated. But what I would say is what that did was give me a big gift associated with breath and how powerful breath is to bring life to our bodies, and how that breath of life is God, a form of God, just like everything is a form of God. But there's this really deep connection between our life force and our breath. Because as I was having that element leave my body, what I recognized was that when I stopped trying, so as I surrendered to the experience, a different form of breath came in.
Today, I'd like to welcome Sarah Snow to the show. Sarah, welcome to Conscious Conversations. It's such a pleasure and an honor to have you here today.
Oh my gosh, the honor is totally mine. Like, as soon as I saw your invitation, my heart was like, yes, absolutely, I will connect. And like I was saying to you earlier, these last months and this last year has been a slower year for me because I just birthed my daughter. But as soon as I saw your name, I just knew that it was a good time to connect with you. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
I just can't wait to get into this conversation with you. That just melts my heart. And yeah, I'm not going to waste any more time. I want to get into your near-death experience, as well as all of the juice that comes after. So I'm just going to hand it over to you, and feel free to share anything leading up to. I know the day of your near-death experience was pretty impactful. So feel free to share anything leading up to and the experience, and we'll just have a conversation about it.
Okay. So actually, I feel like this near-death experience wasn't actually bringing me closer to death. It was bringing me closer to life. And the circumstances that happened before and even at that point and after, I realize now are all synchronistic experience of what is and what is always meant to be. So not even just speaking for myself, but for everybody else, if we're contemplating whether or not the past, present, or future has relevancy, what I want to say is that each part, every part, even the small spaces of mundane existence actually have, joy and bliss and a message in all of those spaces, even if they feel like suffering or pain. So not just the near-death experience, but the pre-life and the pre-death and everything in between all matters. But my experience with the other side happened about 8 years ago. And I had a near-death experience from consuming a decoction, which, if some people don't know what that is, it's like a water infusion with a plant called Water Hemlock. So I was very interested, and I am interested in all things nature and plants. And at one point in my life, I was sort of at a crossroads, and I actually decided to move out into the wilderness and live in a trailer and study plants. And I kind of just took that as an invitation to exit the world in a way, for a lot of convoluted reasons, but also that there was this really deep calling in my soul to remove myself from the illusion of this world and seek to find something that meant something more in my soul towards why I was actually here on this planet. So it was almost like my spiritual immune system was completely full, and it was saying, no more of this 9 to 5, wake up in the morning, do the thing I'm supposed to do, pay my bills. I'm just done. So done with that. I cannot do this anymore. To the point where I actually felt ill, every day waking up. So when I decided to leave, I had a little smart car, packed that up, and I went over to a property of a friend of mine. And I just started to live very simply. So I just wanted to exit all the things that didn't matter and live as close to nature as possible, which means going out into the forest, meditating, connecting with plants, seeing what messages plants had for me, and spending some time on my own to reflect on my life. I had a lot of things happen through the duration of my life from childhood And, you know, a lot of us don't have a lot of space to process that. So I felt like having that openness to be one with nature and to make a proclamation with God. And for me at that time, whatever God was, to speak to me in my life was like my main concern. So I moved out there and I started to study plants that related to women's health and wellness. So I was really drawn to plants that nourish the women and female hormone system. And I actually started working with a plant called angelica root. And angelica root is a hormone balancer. And my goal was actually to commune with the plants, build relationship with them, harvest them, and have an experience with them. I did not know at the time that I would have this depth of experience with plants, but I feel very grateful that the earth and God has allowed me to have this experience to wake me up to life. So when I was harvesting this one plant called angelica, it was contaminated with another plant called water hemlock. Water hemlock is one of the most poisonous plants in North America. And it actually put me into a coma. And the doctors weren't sure if I would survive that space. And I actually don't know if I did survive because maybe I'm already dead now. And I'm speaking to you in a different vibration reality. Yes.
So I know before we pressed record, I shared with you that I had overdosed in 2012.
Yeah.
And I didn't die. Like I blacked out for a couple
Yeah.
of days. And then I
Yeah.
came to in a psych ward, and that sent me down a
Yeah.
spiral of sobriety. But so many times since then, I've had this curiosity, like, did I actually die that
Yeah.
day? And
Seriously, like I have full body goosebumps. Yeah.
yeah, and am I just the people that I interact with now? Are they just people that are either dead with me or can see the dead? Like,
Totally.
so I completely resonate with that statement
Yeah.
that you
But I
made.
think we do die in some ways. Like we die to an identity that we have, and we
Mhm.
die to an energy body that sits on top of us in some way that blocks us from the perception of our reality in a very clear way. So
Yeah,
what happens is when we die, even our near-death experiences, right? We're shedding a layer of the conscious self
yeah, yes,
that then can unblock, right? The opportunity for the subconscious and our relationship with God to peek through and show us something greater. So, yeah, that's what I mean. I think we both died that
yeah,
day
for sure.
and came back clearer, you know? And so I actually say too, from that experience, like when I died, it was sort of like a homecoming, like all the fragmented parts of myself that were held up in trauma in different places. It was almost like, I'm going to say Christ came back and cleared it and brought it back to my soul so that I could be full again, full of life and full of love. Yeah. So it's like I could be fully embodied with myself. So what I experienced after that from surviving that space, and I wouldn't say that I survived it. I would say that it was life was given back to me at that time. Basically so that I could renew my relationship with God. And I don't know if you listened to my other interview, but I'll share this little tiny story. Is actually before I went on that big venture, somebody gifted me a necklace with the symbol of labyrinth on it. And I didn't know what that symbol meant. And before I had that interaction with the plant, when I was doing my meditations up on the hill, I actually asked that necklace, like, whatever you mean, can you just tell me everything that you know, the symbol of the labyrinth? And I didn't know that the symbol of the labyrinth meant birth and death. And the journey that we take, right, to shedding identities and renewing ourselves. So this rebirth experience is actually what was being called into my reality so I could experience a new way of being. So that was the labyrinth. And so now my work surrounds the labyrinth and the lessons that the labyrinth brings. And it's basically a labyrinth is like a maze that we walk in our life that doesn't have actually any dead ends, even though it seems like it does. It's actually one narrow path that leads us back to our center. So yeah, what that plant does, I'll just briefly recap, is it shuts down your peripheral nervous system. So what happens is from the neck down, all of your systems, organ systems, limbs goes numb. And it's a cicutoxin that basically shuts down the abilities for the nerves to fire. So at the end, and then also the beginning of me, the consciousness transcending from my body into another form, I basically suffocated. But what I would say is what that did was give me a big gift associated with breath and how powerful breath is to bring life to our bodies, and how that breath of life is God, a form of God, just like everything is a form of God. But there's this really deep connection between our life force and our breath. Because as I was having that element leave my body, what I recognized was that when I stopped trying, so as I surrendered to the experience, a different form of breath came in. My breath left and another breath came in, which what I would say is like the breath of God, because even though I was not breathing, I was breathing because my body was going to the earth, but my spirit was leaving it, but my consciousness was always intact. So through my near-death experience, my body couldn't function, but I had consciousness and awareness through the process. And so I was able to, with such blessing, experience different layers of consciousness that we transcend when we leave this body and go to a different form, and experience a form of what I call isness, a being state of consciousness that is infused in all things, everything, but also is nothing at the same time. So anybody that's had an experience of this gravity or depth will know what I'm talking about. If you have not had an experience of this gravity, you probably will think maybe nothing of this, or maybe you might have judgment around the things that I say because they may not make literal sense. But in the world of truth and reality, everything is insanity. Get it? Everything is insanity. As in, nothing in the logical mind needs to exist for us to understand and know truth within the body. And I think that's a really big, interesting thing that just came through now, is that when we listen to these transmissions that come through these conversations, to truly be conscious is actually to be a little bit disengaged with the logic and the brain, and to become very alive with the way we feel. Our feeling place is actually the intuitive guidance system that allows us to understand and feel truth within our bodies and ourselves.
Yeah. And I want to add, so like I've never had a near-death experience. But the way that you just said that when you were talking about the breath and presence, like we can access those experiences. And I'm currently training for a marathon. And just in my run the other day, like I actually, this is going to sound crazy, and this is the first time I'm speaking this out loud, but I am running with Jesus.
Yes.
And he's teaching me
It's
and
so
he's
beautiful.
guiding me.
Yeah.
And I started my run yesterday and I had all these questions about,
Yeah.
money or what to do next, or, and
Yeah.
he made it very clear that the lesson was going to be about presence.
Yes.
And the first thing that I went to was my breath. And when I focused on my breath during that run, it was an entirely different experience than any run I have done before. And I have focused on my breath before, because as a runner, you need to focus on your breath. But the way that, and I can't even say how I was guided, but the way that I was guided, it was so apparent that the breath is life. I don't even know how to describe it.
Yeah. There's an exiting of your conscious mind in control of the breath. Because I think when we run, or when we try, or when we force things in our life, we can say, okay, breathe, breathe, and try to control that breath.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's not actually that true presence, that embodied space that we were speaking about. It's like when the mind actually releases, you go into this space of knowing that you're not in control of the breath, and you surrender in a way to that, and it feeds you.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Yeah.
we live with this level of presence that you can experience in running, or if we practice to engage that level of presence in our life, and even the small things that we are doing, even the fact that I'm speaking to you, can I sink my identity down to a space of letting myself be present with my inhale and my exhale?
Yeah.
There's a voice that comes through us. And that's what I want to say, is that voice is like the Holy Spirit. Because when we inspire, we're breathing in spirit that can then shower us with the gift, right? Gifts of being beyond who we think we are. And that allows us to run marathons. Right? Like you experienced. It's like you could finish it, but you couldn't finish it. But God could finish it through you and
Yes.
utilize your body, in a way
Yeah.
that is actually the most optimal
Yeah.
state.
Yeah. We're so in sync because, like I said, I've gotten guidance to take all of my runs, journal about them, and turn it into a book. And so
good.
as I was journaling about this, the biggest lesson, and I've been practicing this and I've known this, but yesterday it just was bigger yet deeper, like more of a core visceral experience that of myself I do nothing. And
Yeah.
with him, all things are possible.
That's right.
So, like, I'm just kind of blown away by this conversation right now because there's so many synchronicities, and that's really, I know a lot of people like to watch near-death experiences and they want all these spiritual experiences, but like you said before, it's in every moment. We don't.
But it is hard to shut off the thinking mind because we have been conditioned and programmed to believe that we have to and must try in this life to become whatever we believe is successful and to become whatever is good in the world. But we were born as innocent and good. And that's where the revival of this born innocent and good under the gaze of God is coming back. And this is like a rebirthing into what trueness is. So when we surrender the I, right, that's when we truly understand this thing. What we're talking about is beingness, isness, is this form that God is in everything in all moments. But I don't need to run this race. I don't need to try. I don't need to show up in any form if I don't want to, or if I do want to. But if I don't show up and I just say, God, empty me, and I just let ease come through, then the graciousness of God's word can be in this space together. And it's not about you or I anymore. And it's not about anyone. It's about the oneness that is God's grace that comes through us that are awakened to that. But when we can't do that, it's often because we have a lot of resistance to that trust. And we have a lot of resistance to that surrender because, of course, it's scary. It's scary because we've been inflicted with an illusion of fear. And I think that this is where, specifically with you connecting into your channel, it's like a lot of your viewers, I think, have this curiosity. And what we want to do with everyone is remind them that fear is the illusion that this physical reality had placed upon us to enslave our consciousness to a lesser form of understanding of the possibilities that are endless, like you were saying. And when we can finally recognize, oh, wait, this has been conditioned onto me for me to believe in this fear and for me to believe in all these resistances that I think are true because I need to run this race, then we become totally enslaved with the illusionary reality, right? That identity that blocks us from that gaze, that blocks us from that Holy Spirit connection. So speaking about it is a way to bring awareness to dissolve these things. So these channels are good because as people listen to them, hopefully the frequency embeds in the cells and the structure of the person's being to allow them to drop, right? To drop those logical judgments that, and I'm going to say this too, because it's curious, because sometimes with people's comments under videos and stuff, it's like dropping the judgment towards what's being said and letting what's being said into the self to let it simmer so that these portions of identity can actually fall is what God is here to bring.
Mhm.
God is here to bring that experience through frequency.
Yeah.
We cannot find the truth through the human general English language. We have to actually go beyond the words and the language to feel the experience of the synchronicity when our souls say yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I think that this is big, huge too, coming through is like, how do our souls say yes?
Yeah.
And
I
how do
I
we
know
feel
this
that?
interview is about your experience, but just what you're saying, I have to share this. So
Go for it.
I went, I had an eating disorder in since I was 5. I went to treatment in 2008 and I ran a marathon in 2007, but it was very colored with the addiction to the eating disorder, to exercise. And so it was about April where I was at the zoo with my niece and her kids and my family. And she had decided to run the New York Marathon. And she was actually inviting me to train with her. And I started saying, I can't do that because of, all these limitations of my previous addiction that I have 16 years recovery for. And once I heard that, I was like, well, that's just a story I'm telling myself. And the zoo there, it started to glow.
Yeah.
And I right near the elephants, and the elephants obviously are like my thing. And so I just said yes. And I couldn't not say no. And I was like, well, I'm just gonna see how this unfolds. And immediately I knew that part of the reason I was saying yes was to use this as an example to show people that we are limitless, and it's really like all our minds that keeps us, trapped or keeps us from experiencing these great, amazing things.
It's the totally the dissolver of obstacle, and the obstacle is resistance, and the
Mm-hmm.
resistance is innate fear that sometimes isn't conscious,
Yeah.
that doesn't want us to, it's a force also that doesn't want us to relish in the glory of God's kingdom here,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
this is God's kingdom, you know.
Yeah.
And it's curious that they sent you to the zoo, which is a bunch of caged animals.
I know. I have a
Right?
thing about the zoo. I'm really
Yeah.
not a fan. I'm
Yeah.
very empathetic, and I don't feel like the animals there are happy, and yet there's also a knowing that that's where they are. So there's nothing wrong. Uh, and yeah, it was a totally interesting experience that, again, like what you were saying is in the surrender, it's like when we surrender and we just say yes, when we truly surrender, we're
Yeah.
shown so
Mhm.
much more than
Yeah.
what we think we can receive from spirit.
And I just love because, you understand that concept of surrender, and surrendering also does mean that it's an accepting of everything as it is. So surrendering isn't that we say, okay, even though these difficult things are happening to me, I can't do anything about it. Thus I surrender and I'm powerless. Surrender is actually recognizing that maybe if everything is happening to me for a reason, for my development or for my lesson or to aid me, then I can surrender in a way towards this is painful, but it's burning away something that requires attention so that I can be free. So thank you, God, for this suffering that grants me the opportunity to be deeply compassionate, right, with what's happening so that whatever in the future comes, I have a greater sense like of empathy and compassion and understanding, right, for others, because I'm going to be then another piece of the puzzle for somebody else's story to empower them. So surrender isn't being powerless. Surrender is actually allowing us to be able to be the fully formed puzzle piece that fits into the grand scope of God's mission a lot easier. It actually helps us to define our edges in a way that isn't connected with our identity. It's connected to the heart's essence. And so what I want to call that is like when I died, I came back, I had this experience of seeing energy form as like an emanation of snow. And my name actually is my given name. I was born on a snowstorm on December 9th. But I recognize that it's actually part of my mission to understand that snow is like God's gift from heaven, but snow is the physical manifestation of water, which is consciousness, which is energy, because water can hold frequency. And the physical slowing down of those molecules to create snow is an emanation of our spirits. So when I'm saying all these things, I'm saying that, all thoughts, all aspects of identity become these snowflake projections that can be seen by some individuals that have awareness, right, of how they are really existing on this planet in terms of energy. And when we can connect with our snowflake or our essence, we can see the edges of who we truly are, the true nature of who we are. And then we know, where is it that my snowflake fits into this world to give my pattern, my emanation of spirit to others that may need me. And I don't know what, I'm just in this channel in this moment speaking about this, but I really feel like God's gift to us is the gift of snow, in the sense of being able to feel and physical, like be in the physical nature of consciousness, because before material things, only what exists is frequency and consciousness. And as it slows down to meet the density of this 3D plane, that's where manifestation happens. So if we want change in our life and if we want freedom, surrendering to the idea of controlling the 3D reality leads us to have that connection with God, reconnection with God, and a rebirth experience, so that what is actually of goodness and of love can actually be birthed in, manifested into this 3D reality, bringing then heaven onto earth. So, wow, so powerful in that God wants, Spirit wants to say, we here live on heaven, in heaven, on earth. And this is the plane of joy. But it had been revoked and the illusion had been placed on us to keep us enslaved like a zoo. But now is the time to release ourselves from those emanations of structure, binding us to what we believe is true.
Yeah.
We're removing them so that God's emanation, right, of love can manifest consciously on this plane again, which is the coming back of Christ. Is the rebirth, right, of coming back into the consciousness of Christ, and Jesus's message of the embodiment of love here can be known for all of us. Mm-hmm. And so now it's so beautiful to see the awakening of the ones that have already chosen in other timeline dimensions to come here to emanate this, because as you know, when it's time for you to surrender, there's really nothing you can do.
Yeah.
And God says, hey, you're on. And then you come onto these channels and you're like, is this actually what I'm supposed to do? And you're like, but I guess, like, it's like not a full, I'm sure exactly what I'm doing, even
Right.
me, but I know that something is moving me because the fear is being dismantled in the being.
Yeah. And
more stories dismantle these.
When you surrender, when I surrender to spirit, like so I live in Phoenix. I have to wake up at 4:30 to even go for a run because it's so hot right now in the summer, and I am not a morning person. And I'm not going to say it's been easy, because training for a marathon is not an easy feat, but it has been effortless in a way that I'm out of bed. Like, I feel the most resistance getting out of bed than any other time where I'm on the run. But it's happening. And that is not the human piece of me.
I love how you're getting this through like your lived experience, as in it's telling you how to run the race without trying, It's like God will run your life for you.
Yeah.
Surrender to the destiny that God has for you,
Yeah.
And
Yep.
more when you're running, you're kind of like training to be more of that embodiment of love, like Christ's message is coming through,
Mhm.
your surrender and leading you.
Yep. And I'm writing about it
So
so everyone
it's
else can learn
so,
about it through a lived experience. Because there's
yeah.
so many people who've had near-death experiences, but there's so many more who have not. And so while we can extract and learn and resonate with your journey and so many others, it's like, unless we've lived it, we can't actually have that, perfect relation to it. So it's like, it's an in the world
Yeah,
journey.
for sure.
Yeah.
For
So
sure.
I want to stop talking about that because I really want to get to your journey when you died and were reborn. So I'm gonna shift gears here so we can go there.
Oh, it's all perfect. I think it's beautiful. And I'm thanking you so much for sharing portions of your story because I think it's very super relevant. I think for a lot of people, and maybe some people are tuning in that are thinking and always thinking about like the rat race and the things that they're, on the hamster wheel of in their on their life. And maybe it's time for them to really have that lived experience to exit and to let God lead. And if this is a message that helps them to do that, then that's what our mission has been and has been accomplished in that. But I wanted to ask you, like, is there anything specific about the experience itself or the lessons that come from that experience that you feel are relevant to ask? And then I can kind of tune in that way because it's so it's so varied, it's so diverse and so huge that I can focus on different aspects if you feel it could be beneficial for your audience.
Um, yeah, so what's coming in right now is like you mentioned a lot about, you know, the death and the rebirth. Um, and so what I feel like I'm most curious about is kind of like a general overview of your journey, but what it was that you learned or came back with that was the most apparent or the most forefront in your consciousness.
So I think what I gained from this experience and lost from this experience was I gained the innate sense of true self, the innate sense of the true essence of who we really are underneath this physical manifestation. Yet I also recognize the benefit, right, of having a physical body so that we can learn and fully embody our experiences of whatever we're experiencing, whether it's joy, suffering, or anything in between, so that we can fully understand the lessons that God has for us here. So, what I've lost and what I gained is I lost the identity associated with living my life from a projected and many people's projections of fear and what needs to happen or should happen in my life. And what I gained from this experience was living life with the breath of God and letting that lead me into deeper spaces of reflecting on suffering in my life so that I could use this journey of life to help to sustain the compassion that's innate within me and revive it. And I'm using these words very specifically because it's not that I'm gaining it, it's that I already had it. We already had it, but it was taken. So it's a revival. It's a rebirthing in the sense that it's just needing to come out of the surface again to be seen again. It's like the shackles being released. And through that experience, what I felt was I felt all the elements of the earth leave my body one at a time through that space of losing my peripheral nervous system. First, my body was weighted super, super, super heavy because I couldn't feel my arms and legs. And so I became like very close to the earth and like almost like I had a body of lead. Then what started to happen was my eyes started to dry and I could feel my throat drying up. So it was almost like the water element was leaving my body. Yeah. And then it was like connecting with this fire element was like, I felt this burning like all over my body. So I almost felt like I was being combusted or alchemized in a way. And then there was this air element. So that's what I was saying, when I started to lose my control of my breath, right? I lost that connection with the ability to control my breathing. Then I then lost that air element. And then the ether portion was sort of that pinnacle moment where I came out of my body. And so it was like each individual element associated with this earth plane left me in the time that it needed to impart lessons on each specific element. But then when I had left the physical body and came out of the space of the material 3D, I was suspended in a state of consciousness that was and is, and I was a part of that. When I left that space, when I left the physical body, I was suspended in this space, the ether, but then also it was like nothing, like there was nothing. It was complete darkness, nothing. So nothing existed. So if you think about closing your eyes at night and there was nothing, there's really nothing. However, there was aliveness in the darkness. There's an aliveness in the nothingness. And then from the darkest dark point of that gaze, without eyes, the gaze of consciousness in that space, there was a small, tiny light that then, when I focused on it, was immediate and then shone upon the spaciousness of my consciousness. And in that, I've explained it like this before, it was rapture. Rapture in the space of vibrating to the point of complete stillness, like almost moving to the point where you're going so fast that you're completely still. And there's a complete sense of peace in that vibration. It's like an eminence. And from that experience, there was another trajectory of then seeing all the faces that ever loved, would love, did love me through human faces. I did see, like in 1 second, like every face, every face, every face, every face, every face, and then a continuation in this moment, and then a vacuum sucked back into my body. And so I kind of went to the bridge and then came back. Did I cross the bridge and meet other beings on the other side? For a split second, yes, there's stories that I can talk about in that infinite space. But for the sake of your interview, I want to say that what brought me back to my body was love, was the acknowledgement of love in all its forms. And then I think from there, that was that experience of rebirth where God said, and I don't know if it was the conscious thought of him saying this, you go down, but my soul came back down into my body and my eyes opened. And then I could see my family around me. And I shared this in one of my other interviews. Even though I had a breathing tube and I had just opened my eyes, I like asked them to give me a pen and a paper. And I wasn't writing, but what God wrote through me was, I love. That's it. Like, so you would think that I wouldn't be able to say or speak or write. I didn't. And actually, after I came out of the coma and out of the hospital, I actually could not read. I could not write. Like, I didn't have those faculties after. But in the moment of coming back into my body, the message that came through was, I love. I love. The identity is love. Not that I love my mom or I love this hospital, but that it's all loved. It's love. It's love. And I remember, and I still feel when I tap into that timeline of that space, like the emanation coming out of these pores of my body affects others. It affects me, but affects others. It's like this emanation of this love that is radiating beyond self. So I guess that's more of a step-by-step sort of journey through different layers that my consciousness went through during that period of time. And when I came back into my body, and after I went through a period of rehab, which actually I didn't really eat for an entire month after I came out of the hospital, and I was thriving. Actually, a couple days after I came back from the hospital, I was back in my parents' place and I looked in the mirror and I couldn't recognize myself. Like, because I was so bright with God's love. And from there, it was a trajectory of sharing that experience in little authentic parcels to people that mattered. And then it turned into a worldwide tour. So I was on tour for 7 years. And I don't even know what happened. I don't even know. Like, I was running that race that I didn't control. Yeah.
So I'm curious, because you were in the space of meditating and connecting with plants. So it feels like prior to this, you were already in an expanded space. When you had the experience and when you came back, did you have just a knowing of what happened, or was there any kind of confusion or having to kind of process or maybe figure out what?
When I came back, my faculties were open and on, no doubt, completely 100% full. Like, I knew that I was a full being, and I knew that before I died and before I had that experience, I was fragmented, like a complete 100% certainty shift. And I went downstairs after I looked in the mirror, and my mom asked me how I was doing. And I said, Mom, I have no fear. And I will say that from that experience and over the last couple of years, fear has ways of coming back in to this reality and testing us and testing me. So I'm not saying that I'm abolished of all fear forever, but there was this real sense of, I don't fear. I don't literally feel the blockage of resistance that fear had been placed on my life before. That shackles are gone, like completely, like gone. I used to have morning anxiety. I used to have feelings of like sleeplessness and insomnia and like this depressed feeling of like feeling something's not right with my body. And I think actually that is what brought me on that holistic journey of actually meditating and looking at plants as a solution and looking at different foods. Like, I trained to be a holistic therapist and a holistic nutritionist. So I actually did that training prior to my near-death experience. But it was all part of God's plan, like it was all part of this unfolding of different pieces of information that would lead me to have the toolbox, right, after I came out from that experience, to then start piecing the pieces together and applying. So I had a direct 100% shift. However, from that experience over the last 7 years, and it still continues, God shows me these little pockets of messages as I revisit this time. It's like if I revisit the marathon that I've been running and different captions, different experiences, I'm like, oh, there's such a deeper meaning here. There's such a richer experience here. And I think that's what our life is for, that reflective process of being like, oh, this is a richer, deeper experience. Almost like it's when we're watching a movie that we love, and we watch it when we're 10 years old and 15 years old and 20 years old and whatever. And it's not even about age, but it's about coming back to it with a new form of understanding, a new form of consciousness. You get to see messages and things that you'd never experienced before, even though it's the same quote unquote story that God's playing for you. So I do experience a coming together of this story continually, even now. But tangible change as soon as I came out of that space, and sustained in different ways, sustained in a way that I recognize that this sharing of my story is part of my mission, just like everybody's. Like, I mean, I think if when we share our authentic experiences with the world, it's actually all of our missions to open that space up to share, because then we can see where our puzzle pieces connect, right? But sometimes we don't recognize it as deeply until later. So hopefully that answers your question, like, how was I changed, and is it ongoing, or was it just like all of a sudden? It's definitely ongoing. And
Yeah.
especially with
And
the birth of my daughter, there was a lot there too. So.
I can imagine. I am curious, when you say it's ongoing, several other near-death experiencers, when they like there's a fading, but when they talk about it, it's like they're back in that space. So has
Yeah.
it stayed like as strong or as intense since you
The
came back?
the facts of the experience, obviously, as time goes on, just like any story, right? They shift and they're perceived differently. So it shifts and changes, and it becomes more alive when you revisit it. Yes, but also is, oh, I just lost my train of thought there. So it's not important, not relevant. So the details are not relevant, is what the message is, in the sense of the factual relevancy of the incident is not so much as important as the frequency of what needs to come through from the awakening of the soul through that experience. So it's stronger when I revisit it, but also it's always there, because it's just that I've opened myself up to be more of a nothingness,
Yeah.
right? Like,
When you were like several times throughout our conversation before we hit record during it, we've talked about that, the words are kind of irrelevant, and it's the frequency and the energy that's coming through. And when you said that you had nothing to fear, and it was like you were whole, I felt that like nothing I've ever felt before. I mean, it was so powerful when you said that. And I know that words don't we can't really find the words that describe some of these things, but like I wonder if there's a way that you could convey more of that whole feeling, like before you knew, or you could tell, or you had a sense that you were fragmented. What is that? What does whole feel like?
it feels unwavering. It feels like not the need to look away. It feels like a sense of ease, that you're always being hugged by a force beyond you. It feels emotional because there's such a deep level of emotive space to commune with in every moment of life. It feels like I could cry right now and also laugh at the same time, because it feels completely like a gift. It feels like life is a complete blessing to be able to experience it, to the point where you know that even if you didn't say or do anything, the emanation of what your heart feels would be felt for generations beyond. It is so tangible that you know that when you look around you, you see what has been stolen. So you feel pain associated with that, but you also see what can be revived and the potential that that revival can bring. So it's almost like all the polarity in the world kind of comes together. So existing without fear is like all of the good and the bad and the judgment and the opinion and the debate and the indoctrination of our consciousness without fear doesn't matter. Like, speak to me in that language. My prayer is that everybody speaks in that language so that we can be heard. That's what it feels like. That's what no fear feels like. Life, my destiny, my experience living, speak to me. It's like so strong, that feeling of speak to me, almost like every day is a communion with God. Every day is a communion or a relationship. It's like no longer can I see the world as this and that, tit and tat, A and B. I can feel the world as it is and let God reign through my being. And I know that's going to sound so ridiculous, but truly, like, if I try to put it into words, living without that level of innate judgment, I recognize that it's all finished, it's all done, it's already good, it's already perfect in its imperfection. So when you go out into the world with that feeling, nothing really matters so much.
Yeah.
It becomes funny. It literally becomes sad and funny at the same time, like a buzzing. And you probably feel that way after you run.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like relieved that it's over, but also elated, but also tired, but also like it's like all the emotions happening, but
Yeah.
in acceptance of it. Because I think what fear does is it fragments us from feeling what we truly want to feel in the moment in fear that it's not correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard other near-death experiencers on my channel in other interviews. Nancy Rhines specifically is coming to mind, and she said that the biggest thing that's changed for her is that she has no fear. And I don't know what that's like. Like I have less fear. And the more I, connect and the more I unravel these conditionings, I have a lot less fear than I did before. But I just, even though there is some sort of remembrance, but it's way back here. It's not at the forefront where I can feel it, but I just want like the world to have no fear.
But
I
I
want
think
that
also
here.
though, fear is good because fear is a teacher, right? Fear teaches us where we still have work to do with acceptance. And I, right, had that tangible feeling of no fear for that moment. But I will say there's still aspects that I'm learning. There's still little bits of fear, of course, because I'm still integrating, like we all are. We're all on this earth plane. So even if Nancy says she has completely no fear, I bet you sometimes she still has fear.
Yeah.
Like in small doses, but the big one is like no innate fear to act and react in this world, right? Like the fear of being able to share your true self, your authentic being.
Yeah.
That is like what shatters, and that is the most powerful essence, right? Like when you're free to share who you are authentically with the world, there's a lot of space that opens up, right? To be able to utilize this world as a playground rather than a prison.
Yeah,
So there's
absolutely.
that aspect, right? But the key is that our fears are gifts too. Our fears, if we see them as gifts, then the acceptance, right, that comes from seeing our fears as gifts allows those resistances to dissolve almost immediately. So even if we say like, "Ooh, I'm a little bit nervous to come onto the show today," or "Ooh, I'm a little bit nervous to interview," or whatever it is, we connect with that feeling, right? And we say, "But that's all right." I think it's the permission to not be perfect, like it's all right to be afraid. And when it's all right to be afraid, then it's allowing the soul in us to take that next step. But if it's not okay for us to be scared, then it's like, oh, I gotta cancel, I can't do it, or it's like I can't because of this. And that restricts us from that ability to play in this playground, right? Because it's like we freeze or we fight or we get into that state of nervous system activation. So the more and more we like help our body to come into a space of calmness and ease by connecting with it, the greater dissolve we'll feel. And I will share this one piece that maybe gives insight is that during my experience with the plant, what started to happen before my entire body shut down is I was getting grand mal seizures. So my body was actually shaking, 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 shaking. So even though I felt dead weight and I couldn't control, my whole body was actually running. Like my whole body was shaking, 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 shaking. And the movement of shaking somatically in the body actually releases quite a lot. So it's
Mhm.
actually an exercise that we can use. But I feel like because that plant shook my body so much, it like shook me to the core, shook me awake, but it like shook off all the energy that was in the fascia, that was in the muscles, that was in the cellular structures, because it was so powerful, these seizures, that they had to strap me down to a table, right? Because I was like 24-hour continual grand mal seizures. But then just like you run, when you wake up from grand mal seizures for 24 hours, or you run like a marathon, you feel like open, spacious, like it's almost like stuff has been lifted off of you. Um, so I don't know where I went on that with a little bit of a tangent there, but it's like how we release fear is actually through movement.
Yeah, after when I finish a run, I was just sharing this with a friend the other day, like, and having been addicted to drugs and alcohol, I feel very qualified to speak about this, right? Like, uh, substances, they alter you in a way that you feel high or, different, but the runner's high, the high that I get from running, it's very whole. It feels very complete. It feels like the light, like is, coming through my whole body, going up into wherever and down into the earth.
Yeah.
There is something that when I started my training, I, would take rest days. I'm still taking rest days, but I noticed on rest days that I would feel really sad or down or really depressed. And, so there is a transformation when you are doing movement, when you're, you
Yes.
know, moving, or there's a word that's not coming in right now, but it's like it's not really that extreme. I mean, running a marathon is extreme, but it's like, there's a push, like there's a push of, stuff out when you're exerting energy. It requires energy
Yeah.
to shake that vigorously, or to run, or
Yeah.
to dance, or yeah. So I understand.
It's almost like I feel like when you're running or you're doing something, you're activating a will, like your will to
Mhm.
like persist in the
Yeah.
face of pain, or the will to persist in the face of something. So when we activate that will to persist, right, it's actually like it shakes off the opportunity for energy to block us, or for demons to block us, or for whatever, and whatever
Yeah.
we want to say. Like it's like we block that ability for, with we block the ability for the cage to close.
Yeah.
Like we block it. The cage tries to close and you're like, no, I'm just gonna leave. It's
Yeah.
like that movement, but you need that will activated, right? And almost what I say is like, first we need to activate our will and then aim it towards God's will, and then surrender our will, and then God's will takes over.
Yes.
But we need that
That
solar
is so.
plexus. We need that, that's the core of our being, needs that push towards to say, I will be authentic in the face of fear. I will exist here. I will. And then after we have that, say, okay, now that I've activated this movement in my life to like not let whatever is barricading me down or pushing me down to affect me, I now surrender my will to God, because I know that that will is going to be stronger than my will.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
there's like a trajectory. But if
Yeah.
we feel like we don't have any power, then we first have to start working on that solar aspect of saying, yes, I will.
Yeah.
And actually, that's like the tattoo that I have from when I was very, very young. And it's interesting because I got that tattoo with not the realization of actually really knowing what that symbol meant until years later.
Really.
But essentially, it's the solar plexus that I tattooed in a space of, because during that time in my life, in my early 20s, like I was saying to you before, I had major anxiety, major depression, major feelings of feeling pushed down, and almost that there was no God in my life. Like there was no father, there was nobody looking after me. And so I had to like engage my will in a way to not let the life that I was leading trap me. And then from there and to now, what I recognize is, wow, actually what I was looking for is actually for my relationship with God to be restored.
That's
So
so
it brought me actually, I will say this, brought me from a very new age spiritual understanding of my existence
Yeah.
to now a full surrender with Jesus. And I will say that because it's actually, and a lot of people are shocked when I do say that, because even though I didn't share it in this near death experience, I did have another experience. I don't know if you've watched that one, where I was in a dark chamber in Guatemala. I put myself there to revisit my experience, to have a reflective process. And then I had an experience with Christ that changed me completely. And then a lot of the things that I was doing before to build connection, I recognized was irrelevant because Christ was with me again. I don't know
Oh,
if that
you're
helped,
speaking my language. It's
but
just,
it moved me from that
yeah.
onward.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. And I'm so curious about this other experience that I have not had exposure to, but I know we're getting close on time.
Yeah,
So I'm going to put that out there, that could be another conversation that we
for
have
sure.
together.
For sure. You
So
can find it on Melissa Dennis's show too. I'll send you the link if you want to watch it.
okay, so I do have a couple of questions that
Yeah.
I ask all my guests. So
Okay.
the first question is, how do you define God?
How do I define God? You can't define God. You
Or
can't define
describe?
God. You can't define God because it is. Uh, it is. But the fabric of what God exists of is the frequency and essence of love. Yeah.
And the second question is, what would you say is the purpose of life?
To experience through our joys, pains, sufferings, elations, whatever emotion you want to name it, the full experience of having a physical body so that we can be humbled to the grandeur of God here. So it's about learning the lessons that we have to learn to allow us to dissolve the resistances that we have towards living by looking at our fears with compassion and acceptance.
And the final question is, if you could take one piece of wisdom that you have now and offer it to a younger version of yourself, what would that one piece of wisdom be?
That is so good. I love this question so much. Unwavering faith. Nothing is a mistake.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And how do people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Also, I just want to say, like, the entire communication, this entire conversation with you, like, my body's been so lit up. I don't know if you can feel it, but it's been like head to toe, it's just like constant. And I'm really just thanking you for that.
Thank you.
I guess you can find me on my website. It's labyrinthholistichealth.com. That necklace came with me after that day. That's where you'd find me. Yeah. And what I do is I help people align to their true essence by helping them see where they're still fragmented and working at how we dissolve those fragmentations to come back to wholeness. And once they come back into that space of their own understanding of their connection with God, then what happens is their essence or their soul blueprint, their snow signature can be emanated to the world. So then what I help people do is bring that to the world. So help people share those divine gifts with others and serve others in their community. And I'll meet you anywhere, from being whatever idea of stuck is for you. And we walk together to the center of the labyrinth. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I have a connection to the labyrinth as well. So I've been having the same experience during this conversation.
I love
So
that. I want to hear that too at some point with you. That's a beautiful conversation.
Yeah. I just want to say this has been so wonderful. I hope to have you back very, very soon so we can just have more of these beautiful conversations about truth and God and love. And yeah, it's just been such an honor. Thank you so much for being you, for sharing you and sharing your experience. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for everything and all your continued service to the world, and every soul that gets a chance to speak to you and revisit their experiences of truth. Because I feel like you're a reviver also, like your message and your story with your personal journey through your own tribulations is that you can never die.
I would like to personally thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so that you never miss a beat. And if you really resonated with this content, please share it with all of your friends so that collectively we can expand our consciousness. Have a very blessed week.